If you're a business owner and would like more information on sponsoring Geek Therapy Radio, just email geektherapy@iheartmedia.com or call 713-212-8422. And with that, meeting adjourned. Let's get our geek on.
High tech, low tech, or no tech. Through our hobbies and our passions, the geek comes out in us all.
The world's of geekdom.
I am a geek and I'm proud of it.
Geeks.
Geeks unite.
Well, let's get those nerds! Nerds! No!
Did you just call me a nerd?
Not all geeks are nerds.
Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
On the line today, I am so super excited, stoked. I'm geeking out is probably the best term to put it, since this is Geek Therapy Radio. I'm geeking out because I have James Rolfe on here. He is the angry video game nerd. James, how are you doing?
Oh, very good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I remember I started watching your videos in 2009, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
And the story behind that is one of my wisdom teeth exploded. Like
exploded?
It shattered on I think it was like Friday night. So I had to wait the entire weekend before I could see a dentist.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So needless to say, I needed a distraction. So I couldn't sleep for 72 hours or whatever. So I had seen one or two of your videos before 2009, but when my mouth was just on fire, that's when I really I binged probably. I probably watched 12 hours straight, which didn't even make a dent in your catalog. But I watched like 12 hours straight back then in 2009. So ever since then, been watching you and Mike. You and Mike do stuff all the time too. Mike and who's the other guy?
There's several. It's mainly
Rotators.
me and Mike, but the other one will probably be Ryan right now, because he does all the web stuff. He does a lot of the merch stuff. So he's a very, very busy guy that does tons of things. So
what I was getting at earlier is you weren't always the angry video game nerd. I think what did you start as?
Well, the angry video
this
nerd
idea
was 2004, but those were just 2 pilot episodes. I didn't have the name yet either. It was just a little joke I did. Then YouTube got big, like early 2006. So I was one of the early, YouTubers, and I that's when I started calling it Angry Nintendo Nerd. And by the end of that year, it became Video Game Nerd, because I branched out to other consoles and stuff.
Right. I was going to say, because you were doing, mostly the reviews were old NES games, and dude, that brings back, and this is probably why you're so popular, is it brings back all these warm, fuzzy feelings. It's because even though the games are crappy, in retrospect, I don't remember being a kid and going to Blockbuster and renting Roadrunner, the Looney Tunes game. I don't remember thinking that game was crappy. I remember renting that game 2 or 3 times because I love that game. But now going back and playing it, I realize this game's not very good.
Yeah, you just made do with what you had.
Right.
It's like there wasn't really a room for complaining back then. Yeah, it was very rare to be like, that disappointed at a game, Yeah. I mean, the only one I remember was Jekyll and Hyde, because that was such a personal experience. I remember renting it from the video store based on the box art. It looked awesome. And then playing it and just not even being able to understand how to play it. And then, your whole weekend is like, usually you put up with it, any game that you rent. But that was one where it's like, okay, I only got like 5 or 10 minutes out of it, and was like, all right, I got to find something else to do.
Plus most of the time, I don't know about most other people, but we were using our allowance for this stuff, and we were getting stoked all through the week. We're talking with our friends at recess and at lunch what game we're going to get, what games we beated, what games were, what's the hot game of the time? You're like, oh, I'm going to go rent Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, maybe make somebody jealous. And then you get the game, you pay what did it cost back then to rent a game? Like $5 or $6, $7, which to a little kid was a lot.
Yeah.
And then you get it and it sucks. So, okay, you rented the game, you rented Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and when you got back to school the following school day, did you try to sell the game? Like, yeah, it's great. Did you try to hype it up?
It was just a rental, so it wasn't really it's no harm, no foul. It's just some time wasted, or if anything, and a little bit of money. But people didn't really talk about him that much. Jekyll and Hyde was just an obscure discovery. It was just one little blip in my memory of this one game I happened to find.
Right.
Never heard of it. I didn't even see it in Nintendo Power. I'm not saying it wasn't in there, but I never saw it. But I don't know. Most people were talking about Contra or Super
Ninja
Mario
Turtles.
Brothers.
Yeah, Ninja Turtles. See, that brings me to a pretty good memory here. That is Ninja Turtles, the arcade edition. To me, that was the first arcade port that I can remember.
Yeah,
that was really good.
Turtles 2, NES, right? Yeah, it was just Turtles in the arcade, but they made that number 2 when they brought it to NES. Yeah, it was the first time where it was an arcade game on your. Well, I can't say that. There was Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, all the Atari games. But it was the first beat 'em up that came to a home console, and being diluted because you couldn't fit the arcade onto a Nintendo cartridge, but still it was cool. It was wow, this is really awesome. But then once Super Nintendo was out, once you got Turtles in Time, where it was a pretty close arcade port, then it changed everything. Then you go back, and now Turtles 2, the arcade game, is not really that big a deal anymore.
No,
but at the time
it's still
it was
fun. It's still one of the Nintendo games to me that's fun to go back to, and still holds up pretty well. Again, we have all sorts of MAME emulators and all that kind of stuff, but still, Turtles 2 on Nintendo, that still holds up today in my book. It's not bad. When I go back to it, I don't think, oh, wow, what rose-colored glasses did I have on when I first played this game? No, Turtles 2 for NES is still good today.
And then there was Turtles 3, the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
That was the first time they did one like that, where it was just original. It's here's an original beat 'em up, styled after the arcade game, but it made into a totally original game.
Right.
I remember really digging that one.
Yeah. So back in the day, you and I'm 34. I don't know exactly how old you are, but I imagine you're
37 now.
Okay,
Doesn't
so we're
feel
about
like
the same
it,
age.
but it's true.
The point is, we both grew up going to arcades. That was a big thing to do. It's not just even at the mall. They had arcades all over the place, and I would go to mostly play Street Fighter, and you put your quarters down on the machine to say I got next, and you're gonna play the current. It's basically a King of the Hill type setup there in the arcades. So going to the arcade, I probably pumped, I don't know, maybe $100 total into Street Fighter, probably all said and told, maybe more than that in the arcade. But when Street Fighter 2 came out for the Super Nintendo, that Street Fighter 2 to me is always a very poignant title, if I can say that, because Street Fighter 2 single-handedly saved the arcade and then killed it again. The arcades were on the decline, then Street Fighter 2 came out, and the arcades saw a surge in popularity, and then Street Fighter 2 came to the Super Nintendo, and once it came to the Super Nintendo, people forgot about the arcades again.
Oh, okay.
What do you think?
Yeah. Or, consoles were starting to catch up with where arcades were,
Right. So what I'm saying is, the port of Street Fighter 2, to me, was perfect on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, it was. I mean, obviously it wasn't exact, but it was good enough. It's like I could play that one anytime.
Right. Versus the Sega port of it, which was not very good.
Oh yeah, the 3DO port was actually probably the closest, except that the 3DO controller only has 3 buttons, so it's pointless.
Yeah,
there is a controller you can get for it that has more buttons, but it doesn't. The buttons are not programmed the way you'd want them to be. Like there's like. Oh, I don't remember what it was, but like your high punch or your low punch is in like the wrong spot, and it totally messes up. So 3DO almost got it 100%, but they messed up on the controller situation.
See, I had a 3DO. I had the FC10 model.
Really? So you had it when it was new?
We didn't get it when it was $600. We got it after the company went under, and you could get it. I think it was still. Okay. It was still like $300, which was still a lot, back in 1994. All my friends had the PS1, and I had the 3DO, and we had, of course, Need for Speed, the first Need for Speed, back when it was a Road and Track magazine kind of sampler type game. But we had Street Fighter on there too. I also had Super Street Fighter 2, the new Challengers, whatever, on PC. They made it for DOS.
Oh, yeah, they put it on, they even put it on, it might even be behind me, actually. I mean, you can't, you know what, I can reach it from where I am. I'm showing it to the camera right now, but I actually have Street Fighter 2 for Commodore 64.
What?
And I'm holding it in the box right now, and on the back, they show screenshots from the game, but the screenshots are the arcade. It's like, it looks perfect. If you actually play the game, it looks nothing like this.
No, and I have played on the C64. I've got my C64. It's not behind me in the shot here, but I've got it at home set up, and I got the. There's an app you can put on your phone. I think it's called like Tap Dancer or something like that, where you can load the game through the audio port of the Commodore 64. So I sat there and I waited. I don't know how long it took to load Street Fighter 2. 15 minutes or something like that, and then it was so bad. And how are you supposed to play it? The joystick has 1 button on it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So
you could do things like where if you push back and the button, it does a certain kind of punch or kick, or like they have all these directional like combinations just to get the most out of that 1 button that you can.
Right, it's ridiculous. James, I'm going to go to a quick break. Can you stick around a little bit after that? I know I only booked you for a little bit, but do you want to hang on for another few minutes?
Yeah.
Is that cool? All right.
Sure.
We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio. Stick around. James Rolfe. We're going to get into what makes him tick, how he got started, and just pick his brain a little bit. So I'm Johnny Hamburger, your mental curator. Stick around. Just a couple minutes. We'll be right back with more Geek Therapy Radio. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I still have James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, on here. I'm looking out the windows here, and it looks like there's a cop car racing 60 miles per hour backwards down the freeway. Nope, I'm just blind. That would have been crazy. Anyways, I've got James here, and James, before we went to the break, I said I was going to pick your brain. I want to know not what makes you tick. We're not going to get into some big psychological, philosophical thing here, but like a lot of us, we may have dabbled around with our parents' camcorders back in the day. So how did you get your start in filmmaking?
Yeah, parents' camcorders. I mean, because I was doing this in the 80s, and there wasn't really... The 80s was an interesting time because every kind of technology existed, like sort of overlap, because you had film, you had video, and film was still like, a little bit expensive, and video was like a little bit too new, and they were all expensive, but
Right.
The first stuff I did was on Super 8. And
wow.
I mean, nothing that I would call significant really. It was just, stuff I was wasting time with, just, well, not wasting time, but just something to pass the time. I was just, I was into all kinds of art. I was into, drawing and painting and recording stories on audio tapes and taking pictures. I was taking still pictures. And then, yeah, and eventually all the technology sort of fell into place where, okay, now we have a somewhat affordable video camera that we would rent for birthdays and stuff. And, I wasn't really allowed to use them because they were expensive and we didn't own it. But eventually my parents got their own. And then I slowly took it over where I would just keep using it, on the weekends or whatever. Right. But then it was like, okay, you got video, it's got sound, it's got, you could combine every art form together potentially. So that's why I got addicted to movies over all the other arts, because with a movie you could have music in it. You could have, it's just a multimedia platform.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I encourage listeners to do with this show is, indulge their geek thing, indulge their hobbies, indulge their passions, because a lot of times we get so, bogged down by work or life or family, whatever, that we kind of forget what we were into as kids or what we were interested in as kids. So I also dabbled in video stuff as a kid. Of course, me and my brothers would do remakes of Back to the Future. We could just get little Matchbox cars and we tried to reenact hoverboard scenes. And I remember telling my brother, I don't know how old I was, 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old. My brother had the high 8 Sony Handycam.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you going to just go in after and erase the wheels from the skateboard? And my brother's like, no. You have no idea how the editing works. So in retrospect, I understand that, we explore that format as you did as a kid, because you start to realize these things. Oh, when you watch a movie like Back to the Future in the movie, it's not just like you can go in and edit out the wheels of the board. Like you can't, we're not using green screens and all sort of stuff back then. We have no CGI that we were using, but it helped us realize these things. Like it enlightened us from a young age as to what movie magic really was. There's stuff I noticed about, I'm not a filmmaker, but there's stuff that I noticed about movies that maybe you can elaborate more on as you make more films. And you probably realize this early on. Like I pay a lot of attention now to cinematography and how shots are framed. Like old Japanese movies. I love old Japanese movies just for the way they frame the shots and then they just let the camera sit there. They establish the scene for minutes at a time of just leaves rustling and things, and it's gorgeous. What do you think about all that?
You're talking about long shots?
Long.
Okay.
Just as you're getting into filmmaking, as you got into filmmaking, it's not just music. It's not just like, hey, point a camera at someone's face. Like there's a whole lot more into it.
Yeah. I'm thinking about long shots now. Like a long moving shot, or or stationary shot, or whatever. Steady shot.
Just a static one. Yeah.
I guess one thought is that the old ones, originally they, the silent movies, they typically shoot everything the way as if you were just recording a play, because nobody was thinking that much about it yet. It was just put the camera down and record it and let the actors and everything else just do the rest. But then you start having more creative ideas that came down the road, like just other interesting places you could put the camera and
like the camera doesn't have to just be 90-degree angle to the actors. You can have it kind of up and at an angle. You can put it behind some scenery so that there's some scenery in the foreground. And all I'm getting at is as we geek out, so to speak, over these new hobbies and interests, you realize these things. It takes you down these creative rabbit holes that, again, you wouldn't have realized when you first picked it up. You might, someone listening right now might not be thinking that I don't want to do any filmmaking because it's not interesting to me. You just set the camera on record and then you record whatever. But just
Either
merely
that
taking
or
that,
they're like aware of how much work it is, and they just don't want to like they don't want the stress of it and everything. So maybe you have that too.
See, yeah, but the point is to try it. So if there's someone driving around right now who has maybe had a passing interest in filmmaking or photography, they've got their camera. We've got cameras on our phones now that would have just blown away anything we had even 10 years ago. I always say about smartphones, I don't like to talk about smartphones too much because I think in the past 5 or 6 years or so, they've kind of plateaued, but the cameras have gotten just incredible. So
everything's gotten better except the phone.
Right.
It's like you can still, what blows my mind is, well, first of all, that the turtle comms from Ninja Turtles became real. So you could actually talk to somebody and see their face now on a mobile device. That's just crazy that that kind of thing is real now. But what blows my mind is that you could record your voice on a phone if you want. Like you could, whether it's on the video part where it's on the camera, or you just record like a voice memo or something, and your voice sounds crystal clear. It's perfect. Yeah. But if you have a phone call, it still has the same like staticky, like crackling, like why can't they improve the voice thing on the phone? And I guess now everybody's texting all the time, which is convenient a lot of times, but but for having a phone call, for actually talking to somebody, I can hardly hear people a lot. Like if they're in a bad spot, and that has never improved. It just seems like that is in the same exact place where it was like since we were kids, or worse. It's worse than landlines.
Exactly. I 100% agree. It's funny when you see all these commercials for 4G LTE Lightning blah blah blah, and you can download. You're watching gigs worth of YouTube videos on the network. It's like, hey, why not just allocate like a fraction more of the bandwidth towards the voice quality? Because I 100% agree. The actual phone part of it is still, it might have been better.
And it's
in
not
1975.
And it's obviously not the speaker, because you can do the voice memos. Like you can, that's not the problem. But it's like, I don't know if it's the cell phone towers, or like what it is. But they just have, they just can't improve that.
Right, and the other thing is, on the flip side, so phone cameras, which sounds weird to say, phone cameras are so good. They shoot in 4K, 60 hertz. I'm sure some of them shoot 4K, 120, maybe. So the cameras in our phones are so good, but the cameras in our laptops are so bad. Why not just put the same type of camera in the laptop? Like, why can't we have those good cameras in the laptop?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. What's going on, James?
What's the deal? What's going on?
All right, James, I've taken up a lot of your time, and I certainly appreciate you being here.
Oh, that's fine.
What would you want to plug? What do you got coming up? What's in the works that people are going to want to know about?
Well, I'd love to plug more of the long-term things, but that's just not happening for a while. Like, I'm working on a book, I'm working on a feature film script, and I don't know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but for these really time-consuming projects, there just isn't enough time right now, but I am chipping away at all of them. But the main thing I've been working on is nerd videos still, so you'll see more Angry Nerd episodes coming up, and that's on the YouTube channel, Cinemassacre.
So the movie, you're doing another movie?
At some point,
hopefully.
Yeah.
At some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to get that going, but it's making movies not an easy an easy hobby to get into. No. It's definitely a long, time-consuming process, especially if you're trying to make a feature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about the book.
Oh yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm.
What is it? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I'm trying. I have no idea. This could be years, before this is ready.
Right.
But I'm just trying to write basically my entire life story, which would be impossible to, fit everything into a book. But I'm mainly
Memoirs.
focusing on the filmmaking side of things and just all the challenges and struggles faced, making movies. And it's just all about the journey of how everything fell into place. And
Yeah,
it's a never-ending journey. So,
Good.
yeah, I just want to share all the, personal stories and everything.
That is wonderful. James, there's like 1,000 other things that I can ask you, and hopefully I can have you on the show again in the future, if that's all right with you.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We'll be in touch, as they say in the biz.
In the biz, yeah.
In the biz. So that was James Rolfe, the Angry Video Game Nerd. Is it okay that I refer to you as Angry Video Game Nerd?
Yeah, that's fine, yep.
Is that, I don't know if that might be something you're trying to move away from or what?
Oh, no, I mean, that's what I'm known as, so it's cool to have something that, you're known as, like, I definitely don't take it for granted, so.
Plus people can go into the Google and just type Angry Video Game Nerd and find all of your stuff.
Yeah.
James, thank you so much for being on Geek Therapy Radio. It was an absolute pleasure. We'll have you on in the future. And once again, on behalf of geeks everywhere, people are just going to chew this up. So, James, thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you.
Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator. Hopefully you've gone at this point and subscribed to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to. Hopefully iHeartRadio app, because that's the best way to listen to podcasts in general, is the iHeartRadio app. NPR is on the iHeartRadio app. Did you know that? It is. Also visit geektherapyradio.com. That's geektherapyradio.com. That's the best place to go to find everything about Geek Therapy Radio. You can get to the YouTube from there. You can get to podcasts from there. You can get to all sorts of things from there. Get all sorts of good information and get in touch with me through Gecko Radio. No, through geektherapyradio.com. So go visit and make it one of your regular stops on the internets, interwebs. You may have heard this week that the beloved British scientist, physicist, pop culture icon, and dare I say philosopher, Stephen Hawking has passed away. Stephen was 76 years old. While his passing is certainly sad, I would actually go as far to say disheartening. Stephen had long since suffered from a rare, slow, progressing form of motor neuron disease, more commonly known as ALS, or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or most commonly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig was the first baseman for the New York Yankees from 1923 to 1939, long before passing away from his disease June 2nd, 1941. Around that time, the U.S. first got involved in World War II. 6 months later, when Japan awoke the sleeping giant on that day of infamy, I can't even say it, that day of infamy, December 7th of that same year. History is so wildly fascinating to me. You begin to notice how many events actually occur alongside other interesting events. But let's get back to Stephen Hawking. Stephen was born January 8th, 1942, almost exactly 1 month after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So Lou Gehrig, the man from whom ALS was named, died 7 months prior to Hawking's birth. Stephen himself to become afflicted with the same disease. Fascinating. Stephen Hawking devoted his research to general relativity, quantum gravity, and any offshoot of those main themes. In a nutshell, or maybe I should say in a singularity, many have described general relativity as being the most beautiful of all existing physical theories, generalizing special relativity and Newton's law of universal gravitation into a unified description of gravity as a geometric property of space and time. In other words, gravity directly affects the measure of space and time. In other words, objects of great mass can bend space and affect the passage of time relative to the gravity associated with their mass. That's why time seems to slow down around your mama. Oh! Okay. In another nutshell, quantum gravity is an area of study within theoretical physics that attempts to describe gravity within the principles of quantum mechanics, where quantum effects simply cannot be disregarded, such as near small, dense astrophysical objects where the mathematics of general relativity just don't add up, such as close proximity to a black hole. The mathematic formulas required to describe quantum mechanics differ radically in the attempt to describe physical phenomena. I love LAMP. If it sounds heady, that's because it is. But Stephen Hawking didn't want his disease to cripple his research, instead using the side effects of being crippled to unlock the power of his mind, something that, due to our mobility, many of us might take for granted. Think about it. If the only part of your body that still works is your brain, you can only exercise your brain. And Stephen did so brilliantly in a way that inspired the entire world. Stephen and his colleagues published many world-renowned theories and essays and received many, many awards for his efforts, although I don't think he got a Nobel Prize. Did he? Did Hawking get a Nobel Prize? Someone look it up. Don't ask the radio guy to look it up. That's called show prep. Anyways, I'm just not sure. Hawking was instrumental in black hole research. According to Tom Banks, professor of physics and astronomy at Rutgers University, Hawking actually proved some rigorous mathematical theorems about Einstein's equations for gravity that showed that, under quite general circumstances, there were places where the equations broke down, what are called singularities, and in particular, the region inside of a black hole is such a singularity, unquote. One of the results of such research resulted in the acceptance by most physicists of Hawking radiation. Basically, Hawking radiation proves mathematically on the quantum level that black holes suffer entropy like the rest of the universe. In other simplified words, that black holes don't just gobble up everything like previously thought. They actually emit radiation. This radiation eventually exhausts the black hole to nothing. Everything the black hole has eaten gets ejected out into the universe as a new form of matter and energy, much like a car running out of gas. Trippy, right? What new form of energy? What new form of matter or antimatter? My show isn't long enough to dive into such discussion, but is hopefully long enough to spark some of you to look into it, or at least lose some sleep as your mind wanders to all the various wonders of our universe. This, of course, is something that I highly encourage. Who knows where the next groundbreaking notion that explains our universe will come from? There may be someone out there who has a shower thought that directly links to unlocking warp drive. So, one of you out there listening might be thinking something in the shower, your mind might be wandering, and you might unlock the secret to traveling faster than the speed of light. So stop thinking about whatever you're thinking about in the shower, winning imaginary arguments. In between all that stuff and other stuff, think about warp drive. Think about, you might stumble down a rabbit trail of thought that leads us to travel faster than light. Anyways, back to Hawking. Hawking was prone to occasional tropes of philosophy, among his most famous being his musing on free will.
I have noticed even people who claim everything is predestined, and that we can do nothing to change it look before they cross the road.
Now the next line is less frequently quoted.
Maybe it's just that those who don't look don't survive to tell the tale.
Now onto the subject of humanity. Stephen quotes,
We are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of very average star. But we can understand the universe. That makes us very special.
I love this. I actually do love this. On a spiritual level, I have often wondered if consciousness itself is what set humans apart against the vastness of the universe. If consciousness itself is divine, is, quote unquote, godlike, It is fascinating that scientifically speaking, the random assortment of atoms, or as Sagan so eloquently put it, star stuff, that makes up our body, somehow over the course of our evolution became self-aware, conscious that we are star stuff. Every other assortment of atoms and molecules, including flora and fauna, is not conscious that we are made of atoms and molecules. Only when it is arranged to make a human brain do those random molecules become aware they are molecules. And those molecules were born in a dying star. That's so freaking fascinating. Where did we get that consciousness? Are there any other organisms in the universe that are self-aware like us humans? Maybe even more self-aware? My goodness gracious. That's what keeps me up at night. So awesome. This is the type of mental exercise that really gets me amped up. It is by far the most fun thing I get to do with my brain. I and many others, and we have people like Stephen Hawking to thank for that. He was more controversial in some of his quotes, particularly in regards to the environment. Quote,
"We are in danger of destroying ourselves by our greed and stupidity. We cannot remain looking inwards at ourselves on a small and increasingly polluted and overcrowded planet."
Now, let me break that apart a bit and discuss what I agree with in my sole opinion, and what I believe can be construed as offensive and controversial. You, the listener, of course, are more than welcome to disagree with me or even agree. That's what makes this format so beautiful, radio. And now that you can get in touch with me with GeekTherapyRadio.com, let me know what you think. How boring would it be if we all just agreed on everything? Count me out. I do agree with the basic notion of, quote, destroying ourselves, unquote. So many whack job environmentalists get this wrong. Again, just in my opinion. I say whack job because I'm referring to those who preach, and I stress preach in every religious connotation, that we are, quote, hurting the earth, unquote. The reason this annoys me is that the message of protecting our planet is good. But this particular mental vehicle is ineffective. It is unscientific. The idea that we are hurting the earth sits on a purely emotional foundation set in shifting sand, whereas we are hurting ourselves is based on the solid rock of science. We are not hurting the earth. We can never hurt the earth. It is offensively arrogant to think that we can hurt the earth. The earth is an unconscious rock floating through space. We can, however, hurt ourselves. The earth can and does, through laws of science, inflict upon us the end result of our own actions. Cause and reaction. When you throw a ball against a brick wall and the ball bounces back and hits you in the face, it's our own fault. And when the ball has no... Let me say that again. When you throw a ball against a brick wall and the ball bounces back and hits you in the face, that's our fault. And the wall has no clue anything happened. The Earth has been here for billions of years before humans and will remain billions of years afterward when the sun gobbles it up and explodes. All we can do as humans is make our home filthy and uninhabitable for our form of life. The Earth itself will carry on with or without us. If we kill ourselves by polluting our atmosphere, we simply die off, and the Earth will clean the atmosphere after we're gone, like we were never here. So we're not hurting the Earth. The Earth doesn't care that we're here or not. We can dump all the oil we want into the ocean, kill ourselves by killing the ocean. The Earth will bounce back. The Earth will clean it up. It knows what to do. It knew what to do before we were here. It will know what to do after. No, of course freaking not. This is not me advocating, yeah, let's just keep, pumping gas into the atmosphere or oil into the oceans. Of course not. That's dumb. We destroy Eden, but Eden will just grow again like we were never there. So I agree with Stephen that we can only kill ourselves. I like how he uses the correct wording, not whack job emotional rhetoric. Except for the part where he calls humans stupid. That's an emotional response. Stupidity was used emotionally and can't be scientifically quantified. The reason this is ineffective is that it fosters the opposite response from those you're trying to convince. In 2016, we saw a candidate hurl an insult into the voter base, which had an adverse effect on their campaign efforts. But emotion entering discussion to solve a problem can be used ethically to a desired end. I really try and stay away from controversial subjects like gun control on this show, but by purely scientific data, 0.00001% of Americans die in mass shootings, while exponentially more meet their end through cancer and disease. But while mass shootings have nowhere near the body count racked up by disease, it takes an extreme emotional toll on the entire population. Be honest with yourself. How much sleep do you lose over a random neighbor dying of cancer versus a random person dying in a mass shooting? Just be honest with yourself. The mass shooting is many, many times more emotionally impactful on the general public's life. So, if the aim is to reduce gun violence, the data is inconsequential. The science doesn't matter. And in fact, the scientific data associated with gun violence arguably is inconsequential toward the larger issue of mental health. And mental health is more difficult to lock down than theories on quantum physics. But let's move on. When it comes to God, Stephen's thoughts seem to depend on his mood at the time. Not that I think he believed in God. I'm pretty sure he most certainly didn't. The reason I speculate rather than make a definitive statement on Stephen Hawking's spirituality is that no one can fully understand another person's spirituality or lack thereof. And most people, it ebbs and flows. Some of my own family members have denied and acknowledged God cyclically for as long as I've known them. In one quote, Stephen says,
"So Einstein was wrong when he said God doesn't play dice. Consideration of black holes suggests not only that God does play dice, but that he sometimes confuses us by throwing them where they can't be seen."
I think it's important to note how diplomatic Hawking is in most of his discussions, merely saying that certain considerations suggest an alternative way of thinking. He isn't making a concrete statement, knowing full well how fluid things can be in the pursuit of science. What we knew yesterday is completely different than what we will discover today and what we'll know tomorrow. On a different note, he's more bold in his choice of words. On a different day, he's more bold in his choice of words.
"I regard the brain as a computer, which will stop working when its components fail. There is no heaven or afterlife for broken down computers. That is a fairy store for people afraid of the dark."
Well, Stephen, in my opinion, that may well be true for some who believe the fairy tale, but for others, it's affirmation not to fear at all. On another day, Stephen says,
"What I have done is to show that it is possible for the way the universe began to be determined by the laws of science. In that case, it would not be necessary to appeal to God to decide how the universe began. This doesn't prove that there is no God, only that God is not necessary."
Again, pretty diplomatic. He made a point to note that his findings are not an attempt to outright disprove God's existence. In my opinion, that would be a horrible, misguided premise to pursue scientific study, just as equally foolish as a pursuit of scientific endeavor to prove God's existence. It's perfectly fine to go to church on Sunday and then to the lab on Monday, and to let your research privately sway your personal spiritual notions. Privately. Don't bring your spirituality into science, and science also doesn't really have a place in a spiritual setting. That's not to say that the two are mutually exclusive or that you exclude either from your life. It just means they usually don't mix well together, but they're perfectly fine separately. That doesn't mean a person has to choose either or. They can choose both. That's a narrative that doesn't get mentioned much these days, is that you can have your religion and you can have your science too. They do not exclude each other from somebody's life. On that note, have you seen Bill Nye's show on Netflix? All the unnecessary pot shots he takes at religion, it's a science show. Religion has no business even being brought up. Just stick to the science. We'll watch something else if we want to feed our spirit. Now, I like Bill Nye. I just think his inclusion of spiritual pot shots on a science show were a mistake. Lastly, Stephen's thoughts on disability. After his initial diagnosis, the doctors only gave him a few years to live. After all, he was born only months after Lou Gehrig died young of the same disease. He said,
"My expectations were reduced to 0 when I was 21. Everything since has been a bonus."
As time went on, he became increasingly aware, of course, that the prognosis was inaccurate. He never let it get in the way of his work, saying,
"In my opinion, one should concentrate on activities in which one's physical disability will not present a serious handicap."
Now, I'll end with Stephen Hawking's endearing sense of humor. Arguably, I can't even talk. I can never talk. My job is radio talking, but I can't talk. Radio talking. I'll end with Stephen Hawking's endearing sense of humor, arguably one of the most inspiring qualities about him. He has appeared on many, many TV shows, including one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, in which he is playing poker on the holodeck with other historical giants in scientific history, including Einstein. But perhaps it's this last quote that best encapsulates his beautiful sense of humor. Quote,
"The downside of my celebrity is that I cannot go anywhere in the world without being recognized. It is not enough for me to wear dark sunglasses and a wig. The wheelchair gives me away."
Rest in peace, Stephen Hawking. May the universe embrace you and unveil its infinite wonders. Hope you enjoyed this week's Geek Therapy Radio. If you're driving around wondering, oh my goodness, what did I miss? What cool stuff did he talk about on this show that I've never heard of yet? Called Geek Therapy Radio. Well, in the first 2 segments, I talked to James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd. You might know him from YouTube. His videos have hundreds of millions of views. His YouTube channel is called Cinemassacre. That's cinema and massacre, but all together. Cinemassacre. Play on words. James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd. Then in the last segment, I did a big piece about Stephen Hawking, paying tribute to Stephen Hawking. So be good to each other, my geeks. Be good to yourself and be good to everyone around you. The world needs more of it, and I will see you on next week's Geek Therapy Radio.
Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.